You're probably familiar with 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and maybe even 1st and 2nd Esdras from the Apocrypha. But how about 1st and 2nd Ezekiel? No? No worries. Most haven't heard of it. But back in the 1st century, that is, the 1st century of the Common Era, Jesus' time, it was evidently a thing. At least to some. We know this from Josephus, a Jewish historian from the 1st century. This is what he had to say. He, referring to Jeremiah, also left behind him in writing a description of that destruction of our nation which has lately happened in our days, and the taking of Babylon. Nor was he the only prophet who delivered such predictions beforehand to the multitude. But so did Ezekiel also, who was the first prophet that wrote and left behind him in writing 2 books concerning these events. That's from Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, Book 10, Section 79, William Whiston's translation. So according to Josephus, Ezekiel left behind 2 books concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. But what are these 2 books? Well, there are a few options. The first is that these 2 books of Ezekiel are now combined into the one book of Ezekiel in our Bibles today. A second option is that one of these 2 books is the book of Ezekiel we all know, and the other is now lost. A third option is that neither of these 2 books of Ezekiel that Josephus mentions are the book of Ezekiel we have in our Bibles today, but that they're both lost books of Ezekiel. And of course, there are other more complicated options as well, like the book of Ezekiel in the Bible being partly composed of one of the 2 books Josephus mentioned, while also containing additional material, and the other book Josephus mentioned is now lost. There's also at least one text from the Dead Sea Scrolls that seems to be another book of Ezekiel, sometimes called Pseudo-Ezekiel, and sometimes, and less negatively, called 4Q 2nd Ezekiel. And also, early church fathers sometimes quoted from some book of Ezekiel statements that aren't found in the Ezekiel we know. Is this yet another book of Ezekiel? So perhaps, even if one of the books Josephus spoke of is lost, it might not be entirely lost, whether preserved in the Bible or elsewhere, like in the Dead Sea Scrolls or in quotations of it in the writings of the church fathers. Unfortunately, right now, we just don't know which option is the right one. There isn't enough to go on to know for sure what Josephus had in mind. So you might be wondering, what's the point of even talking about it then? Well, actually there are quite a number of reasons. For example, we might be more likely to solve a mystery if we know there's a mystery to solve. But even without solving it, there's something important we can learn from this. What I have in mind is a lesson we can learn about the biblical canon. The truth is, back when Josephus wrote, there was no Bible like we have today. Books, those things with pages bound together on one side, hadn't even been invented yet. And of course, I'm talking about the technology that we call books. Literary compositions had been around for a long time. But back then, they weren't written in what we call books. They were written on scrolls. Frequently, there was just one writing per scroll. Like, one scroll would have Isaiah on it, another would have Job, etc. Though sometimes several smaller literary works were included in a single scroll. But given the reality of the physical medium for literary works, that is, scrolls, it was only natural to view each writing as its own thing. And no one had yet thought to collect a bunch of these writings together into one book, and have it be the one true authoritative collection. Sometimes people point to Josephus as evidence that there was a fixed biblical canon in his day. But to use his writings in this way can only be accomplished by cherry-picking one quote and ignoring other things he had to say, like this 2 books of Ezekiel thing. Plus, one would have to ignore a whole lot of other evidence regarding the development of biblical canons. Here's the one quote I'm referring to that people sometimes use to support the idea that there was a biblical canon in Josephus' day. It's from Against Appian, Book 1, sections 38 to 42. Again, this is Josephus. For we have not an innumerable multitude of books among us, disagreeing from and contradicting one another, as the Greeks have, but only 22 books, which contain the records of all the past times, which are justly believed to be divine. And of them 5 belong to Moses, which contain his laws and the traditions of the origin of mankind till his death. This interval of time was little short of 3,000 years. But as to the time from the death of Moses till the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, who reigned after Xerxes, the prophets who were after Moses wrote down what was done in their times in 13 books. The remaining 4 books contain hymns to God and precepts for the conduct of human life. It is true, our history hath been written since Artaxerxes very particularly, but hath not been esteemed of like authority with the former by our forefathers, because there hath not been an exact succession of prophets since that time. And how firmly we have given credit to these books of our own nation is evident by what we do. For during so many ages as have already passed, no one has been so bold as either to add anything to them, to take anything from them, or to make any change in them. But it becomes natural to all Jews immediately and from their very birth to esteem those books to contain divine doctrines and to persist in them, and, if occasion be, willingly to die for them. Again, that's Josephus in his writing Against Appian, Book 1, sections 38 to 42, and also, again, from the William Whiston translation. Before we deal with the Bible canon issue here, I just have to point out something that's somewhat of a side issue, but actually has a bearing on how we should view the accuracy of Josephus' statement. One of the things he says here is that during all the ages from the time these 22 writings were composed to his own time, no one had added to them, or removed things from them, or changed them in any way. If any of these 22 writings were the writings that were later compiled into the Bible, which is probably the case given what he says about the first 5 being attributed to Moses and covering laws and also the history from the origins of man up until the death of Moses, so that sounds like it's probably the Pentateuch, then this is actually just flat wrong as a matter of empirical fact. Probably the most striking proof that this is wrong is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, since they are actually manuscripts of ancient Jewish writings, including the writings that were later compiled into the various Bible canons, that date to before the time of Josephus. In these manuscripts, that is, the Dead Sea Scrolls, changes are evident all over the place. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain multiple copies of the same book, and this is true for many different books. But between those multiple copies, there are differences, sometimes major differences. There are even manuscripts where you can see that one scribe penned the text, and then another scribe came by afterward and made changes, and you can tell that because of the different handwriting. But even aside from the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are differences between all biblical manuscripts. For example, differences between the Septuagint and the Mesoretic text. And if you aren't familiar with these terms, I'll briefly explain. The Septuagint is a term that's used for ancient Greek translations of Hebrew writings. The first books were translated in the 3rd century BCE, and more were done over the next few centuries. So the Septuagint isn't a single manuscript or even a fixed collection of writings. Septuagint is just a label we use to refer to a whole bunch of Greek manuscripts that are translations of Hebrew writings and that share other similarities, like being translated at roughly the same time period. Likewise, the Mesoretic text isn't a single manuscript. It's a bunch of different manuscripts of Hebrew scriptures that share certain similarities. So, there are differences between the Septuagint and the Mesoretic text. And there are also differences between the manuscripts of the Septuagint and other manuscripts of the Septuagint. And there are differences between the manuscripts of the Mesoretic text. Again, one Mesoretic manuscript differing from another Mesoretic manuscript. And there's way more beyond this that I'm just not able to mention right now, but hey, perhaps we can get to that in future podcasts. The main point, though, is that we know for sure that the Hebrew scriptures actually did have things added to them, and things removed from them, and changes made to them. We know this because we actually have the manuscripts where those changes are found. So we know for sure that what Josephus says here simply isn't true. Okay, back to the canon issue. Josephus said that the Jews held 22 books in highest esteem, believing them to be divine. But, as we've just seen, we can't take for granted that what he's saying is true. But even without thinking he's saying something false, there are some questions. For example, when he says that the Jews have only 22 books which are justly believed to be divine, we have to ask, justly according to who? Evidently, Josephus thought that only 22 books were justly believed to be divine. But this just doesn't tell us how many agreed with him. We definitely don't have any evidence that the majority of Jews agreed with him. It could have just been Josephus's opinion for all we know, or just his and that of a few others. And since this doesn't provide evidence for how many people agreed with Josephus, it doesn't provide evidence that the Jews had a Bible canon. A further problem is that we just don't know which books he was referring to. While he says what some of the books he was thinking of are, most of them are just left unspecified, and so we just can't know for sure which books he had in mind. Furthermore, other evidence shows conclusively that there actually wasn't an official fixed collection among the Jews at this time. Some of the evidence that I'm referring to is included in rabbinic literature, where it's evident that Jews continued to debate whether certain books should be counted in their sacred collection of scriptures for centuries after this. The debated books included Sirach, Esther, and even Ezekiel, among others. And eventually, the mainstream Jewish community settled on 24 books, not 22. And of course, when Josephus wrote, some Jews, like the Sadducees, accepted even fewer than 22 books. And others, like the Qumran Essenes, seem to have accepted many more. And plenty of Jews didn't think prophecy had ceased. Among these were John the Baptist, Jesus, Paul, and many others. Okay, so what about these 2 books of Ezekiel that Josephus mentioned in his book Antiquities? Did he include them in his list of 22 books? If so, what books in what would later become the Hebrew Bible did he leave out? Regardless of the exact identity of the 2 books of Ezekiel that Josephus mentioned, his reference to these books is just one of the many facts that lets us know that scripture collections were not the same in his day as they are in our day. And I'd say that's pretty important to know. If you appreciate what you're learning in this podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you would take just a few minutes to rate and review the show. Reviews especially can help people who come across the show to know if it's something that they might be interested in. And if you're wondering about what you might include in a review, just a brief explanation of what you like about the show could go a long way. Thanks a whole lot, and I'll talk to you guys next time.